Greece horror stories, The Chariot of Death. Based on real stories. Not all terror comes from fiction. Story 1. The night I challenged the death cart. The account of the corregidor of Oaxaca. There are certain nights that mark your soul forever. Mine was in 1789, when the streets of Oaxaca fell into absolute silence, as if the city itself was holding its breath. I, Don Francisco de Montejo y Leon, corregidor of Oaxaca, was about to confront what no man had the courage to face, the death cart. Oaxaca was not just another Spanish colonial city. There was something in the shadows of its narrow streets, in the curves of the stone alleys, that seemed to guard ancient secrets. As a representative of the Spanish crown, I was determined to bring the light of reason to this land of superstitions. When I arrived in the city, rumors about the death cart were already old. They said it was a spectral vehicle that appeared on moonless nights, pulled by skeletal oxen with flaming eyes, driven by a hooded, faceless figure. The sound of its wheels creaking on the pavement was unmistakable, a churring that froze the blood and announced that someone would die. The nuns of the convent of Las Capuchinas were the first to report the phenomenon to me. During their night vigils, they heard the ghostly creaking approaching along Morelos Avenue, near the church of La Soledad. "It is a warning, Señor Corregidor," whispered the Mother Superior, her eyes downcast, refusing to meet mine. "When the cart passes, a soul is marked to depart." An elderly woman named Doña Nila swore by all the saints that she had seen the EI cart covered with black cloths through her window. Before she could see the driver, she fainted in terror. Her children found her cold as marble, muttering incoherently about eyes that glowed in the dark. The deaths began 3 weeks after my arrival. First was Don Esteban, a prosperous silver merchant. His body was found the morning after the sound of the cart, with no visible marks, but with an indescribable expression of terror frozen on his face. His eyes, open in panic, reflected something that no one should ever witness. Then came Maria, the baker's young daughter. Her mother reported hearing the churring pass in front of their house at midnight. At dawn, she found the girl in her bed, cold as ice, without any sign of violence. Only a lock of her hair had turned completely white. The third victim was the cathedral's sacristan, a devout man whom everyone considered protected by faith. They found him at the altar, kneeling in prayer but already lifeless, his fingers clutched so tightly to his rosary that they had to break his hands to separate them. With each death, panic grew. The streets emptied at dusk. Businesses closed earlier. The evening masses were canceled because no one risked walking after sunset. "It is the death cart, Señor," explained the local priest, his voice trembling. "It comes to fetch those whose time has ended. Whoever sees it or hears its call is marked." I smiled with scorn. As a man educated in Europe, I could not accept such superstitions. However, when the fourth victim appeared, a robust, fearless soldier from the garrison, I began to question my certainties. As the highest authority in the city, I initiated a meticulous investigation. I personally examined each body. There were no signs of poisoning, strangulation, or any violence. The local physician was perplexed. "It's as if their souls had been ripped from their bodies," he muttered, avoiding my gaze. I noticed a disturbing pattern. All victims were found with soil under their nails, as if they had clawed at the ground in desperation. And at each scene, there was a peculiar smell, not of decomposition, but of burnt wax and something older, like incense forgotten in a sealed tomb. I interrogated the night guards. None admitted to having seen the cart, but all confirmed having heard the cheering. One of them, more courageous, confessed to having followed the sound one night. "The cart disappears at the end of Calle del Cireneo, señor," he said, his voice barely audible, as if the street swallowed it, and when I approached, I felt a coldness that was not of this world. That was when I discovered the most disturbing secret. The Calle del Cireneo had been built over an ancient Zapotec indigenous cemetery. During the excavations for the city's foundations, the Spaniards had disturbed ancestral tombs. An old indigenous man, the last who still remembered the ancient traditions, confided in me. The Spaniards did not respect the guardians of the underworld. The cart is Mictlantecutli, the Lord of Death, who comes to claim the souls that are due to him. The deaths continued, following a pattern that only I seemed to notice. Always on moonless nights. Always people who had somehow disrespected local traditions or disturbed sacred sites. It was then that I made my decision. On the night of November 2nd, Dia de los Muertos, I gathered 7 of my bravest alguacils. I armed myself with my sword, my silver crucifix, and my unwavering faith in reason. We positioned ourselves at the intersection of Calle del Cireneo and Morelos Avenue, exactly where the ghostly cart was most frequently sighted. The night was abnormally cold for Oaxaca, and an icy wind swirled dry leaves in small whirlwinds at our feet. At midnight, the silence was so deep that we could hear our own breathing. And then it began, first as a distant whisper, then gradually growing, the unmistakable churring of ancient wheels over stones. My men exchanged glances, fear evident on their pale faces. 2 of them fled immediately. I did not blame them. The sound was like nothing I had ever heard before. It wasn't just the noise of wood and metal, but contained something more, like muffled groans and distant laments interwoven in the creaking. And then I saw it. Emerging from the fog that hadn't existed moments before, the cart slowly advanced toward us. It was exactly as described. Ancient dark wood, pulled by 2, whose eyes glowed with a supernatural red light. Their forms were skeletal, and one could see through their ribs. But the driver, that was the most disturbing. A tall figure under a black cloak where there should have been a face, there was only absolute darkness. In a bony hand it held a candle whose flame did not flicker, despite the wind. My knees weakened. I felt a pressure in my chest as if someone was compressing my heart. The air around was so cold that my breath formed dense clouds. The cart stopped a few meters from us. Silence returned, even more oppressive. With a courage I didn't know I possessed, I stepped forward and raised my staff of authority. "Quien vive?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty streets. The hooded figure slowly inclined its head in my direction. That was when I realized the cart was not empty. Inside it, barely visible in the gloom, were translucent human forms, the dead who had been taken, and among them I recognized faces. Don Esteban, Maria, the sacristan, the soldier, all staring at me with empty eyes, their mouths open in silent screams. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was not sound but seemed to form directly in my mind. "It is not your time, corregidor, but questioning the inevitable has its price." A cold like no other invaded my bones. The crucifix in my pocket suddenly heated up, almost burning my skin through the fabric. In an instinctive movement, I pulled out the crucifix and raised it toward the cart. A silver light burst from the object, illuminating the ghostly scene. The figure retreated. The skeletal oxen whinnied in protest. The entire cart seemed to tremble, like an image reflected in disturbed water. "By Christ the Redeemer," I shouted, "I order you to leave this city in peace." A sudden and violent wind swept the street. The cart and its driver seemed to disintegrate into the darkness, like smoke dispersed by a gust. The churring transformed into a high-pitched scream that faded in the distance. Then came the silence. A silence so profound that it seemed to buzz in my ears. When the sun rose the next morning, they found me still in the same place, the crucifix firmly clutched in my hand. My hair, which the night before had been completely black, had dawned with a streak white as snow. There were no more mysterious deaths during my tenure in Oaxaca. The cart was not seen or heard again. I ordered special masses for the disturbed souls of the ancient cemetery and had a small chapel built at the end of Calle del Cireneo. But peace had its cost. Since that night, I have never slept deeply. In my dreams, I hear the distant churring, like a reminder that I have only postponed the inevitable. Years later, when I left Oaxaca to return to Spain, the old indigenous man sought me out one last time. "The cart waits, corregidor," he said, his ancient eyes fixed on mine. "Not for you, not yet, but one day it will return to collect its debt." Decades have passed. I have aged but never forgotten, and on the darkest nights, especially when the wind blows in a certain way, I still hear the distant creaking of ancient wheels. They say the cart returned to Oaxaca after my departure, that even today, on moonless nights, its churring can be heard near the Church of La Soledad. And if you, traveler, find yourself walking alone on these ancient streets and hear the sound of wheels creaking in the darkness, do what I did. Raise your faith as a shield, for the death cart always collects its price. But remember, looking directly at it is risking seeing not only its faceless driver, but also the faces of those you have lost. And that sight may be more than any mortal heart can bear. If this story sparked your interest in the mysteries that inhabit the shadows of our ancient cities, subscribe to my channel for more accounts from those who have faced the supernatural and lived to tell the tale. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in the corregidor's place? Faced the cart, or sought refuge in the safety of your home? Story 2. The mark of the Carreta Nagua, the pact that sealed my fate. There are sounds that once heard never leave your memory. The noise of the wooden wheels of the Carreta Nagua on the dirt road is one of them. A creaking that doesn't belong to this world, followed by the metallic tinkling of dragged chains. When that sound stopped in front of my house that April night in 1978, I knew someone in my family was marked to depart. What I didn't know was that, before dawn, I would make a choice that would haunt me for 5 decades. My name is Miguel Sanchez. I was born and raised in a small village on the outskirts of Masaya, Nicaragua, where the stories of the elders are more than simple legends. They are warnings passed down from generation to generation, kept alive by fear and respect for the unknown. Among all these stories, none provoked as much dread as that of the Carreta Nagua. The first time I heard it, I was only 6 years old. My grandfather, Don Esteban, sat with me by the fire while shadows danced on the walls of our humble home. "The Carreta Nagua is not a simple cart," explained my grandfather, his voice reduced to a reverent whisper. "It is the vehicle of death itself, pulled by oxen that are merely bones, guided by a skeleton that carries a candle whose flame never flickers. His eyes, clouded by age but still penetrating, fixed on mine. When it stops in front of a house, Miguel, it's because it has come to take someone who lives there, and those who see it or hear its call never know peace again. The origin of the Yos legend, he told me, dated back to the time of Spanish colonization. When the conquistadors arrived on our lands, they often invaded indigenous villages during the night, capturing our ancestors and chaining them in carts to be taken as slaves to the silver mines. The sound of chains and wheels on stones became the harbinger of terror, continued my grandfather. Over time, our people began to believe that those carts led not only to slavery, but to certain death in the depths of the mines. According to the legend, the souls of those who died in these terrible conditions returned as vengeful spirits, and death, having compassion for their suffering, granted them a spectral cart to travel between worlds, collecting souls that were marked to depart. The year was 1978. I was 19 years old, living with my parents, my 8-year-old sister Elena, and my grandmother Doña Carmela, who was very ill. Our house was on the outskirts of the village, close to the dense tropical forest that everyone avoided. After dusk, the first signs that something was wrong came from the animals. Our 2 dogs, Lobo and Canela, always so loyal and calm, began to behave strangely. For 3 consecutive nights, they howled non-stop facing the forest. Not warning barks, but deep and anguished laments, as if they were pleading for something we couldn't understand. On the 4th night, the dogs simply disappeared. There were no signs of struggle, no indication they had been attacked by predators. It was as if they had evaporated into the darkness. That same night, my grandmother took a drastic turn for the worse. Her breathing became shallow. Her eyes, once lively and attentive despite her age, seemed clouded, fixed on an empty point above her bed. "They are coming, Miguel," she whispered, grabbing my arm with surprising strength for someone so frail. "I can hear the wheels. I can hear the chains." I tried to convince her it was just the delirium of fever, but something in her gaze made me doubt my own words. My parents had gone to the city to buy medicine, leaving me alone with Elena and my sick grandmother. Night fell quickly, as it always does in the tropics, and with it came an abnormal silence. No insects sang, no nightbirds called. It was as if all of nature was holding its breath, waiting for something terrible. Elena was sleeping in the room next door. I was keeping vigil by my grandmother in the small room illuminated only by a tallow candle. That's when I heard it. First, the sound of wooden wheels creaking against the beaten earth of the path leading to our house. A slow, deliberate sound, as if each turn of the wheels marked the passage of time toward the inevitable. Then came the metallic tinkling of chains. Not the casual noise of metal against metal, but an almost musical sound, rhythmic, as if the chains themselves were singing an ancient funeral song. My hands began to tremble. The candle I was holding cast dancing shadows on the walls of the room. The cold I felt wasn't natural. Even on the coolest nights, the tropical climate of Messiah was never truly cold. But this cold, it penetrated to the bone, as if the very air around me had been replaced by something from elsewhere, a place where the sun never shines. The sound stopped abruptly, right in front of our house. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. I knew what it meant. Everyone in the village knew. When the Chariot stops at a house, it comes to take someone. I looked at my grandmother. Her eyes were open, but she no longer saw me. Her gaze was fixed on the ceiling, her breathing even weaker. "The time has come," she whispered so low I had to lean in to hear her. "Don't let them take me, Miguel. Not yet." It was at that moment that Elena woke up. I could hear her light footsteps crossing the hallway, her childish voice calling my name in fear. "Miguel, someone is calling me from outside," she said, standing in the doorway of the room, rubbing her sleepy eyes. "A strange voice is saying my name." My heart skipped a beat. The Carreta Nagua hadn't come for my grandmother as I had thought. It had come for Elena. What happened next defied everything I believed about the world. Contrary to the most fundamental warning of our culture, never look at the Carreta Nagua, I walked to the small window of our house. The wood of the frame was ice cold under my fingers, as if it had been preserved in ice for decades. Through the crack in the tattered curtain, I saw something that no living being should witness. The cart was there, exactly as in the stories, made of ancient wood darkened by time, its boards not simply worn, but seeming to have rotted and regenerated countless times over the centuries. It was as if the very structure of the cart existed simultaneously in various stages of decomposition. The oxen pulling it were not animals in the common sense. They were skeletal structures that seemed composed of intertwined bones and shadows. Their ribs were visible, expanding and contracting with impossible breath. Their eyes, those eyes, glowed with a phosphorescent green light that illuminated nothing around them, as if that luminosity existed in another plane of reality. But what made me recoil, almost dropping the candle I still held, was the figure driving the cart. A skeleton covered in black rags that looked more like coagulated shadows than actual fabric. Where there should have been a skull, there was only darkness punctuated by 2 points of light. Eyes that seemed to know every thought, every fear that had ever passed through my mind. In its bony hand, the figure held a candle identical to mine, but whose flame did not oscillate, even with the wind that was beginning to blow. In the other hand, it held reins made of some material that seemed alive, pulsing like veins exposed to the air. The figure slowly descended from the cart. There was no sound of footsteps, only the occasional tinkling of the chains it dragged. Its movement was too fluid for someone composed only of bones, as if it glided on air instead of walking on earth. It was then that I recalled the darkest stories, those that the elders told only in whispers, when they thought the children were already asleep. Stories about pacts, about bargains with death. Few people ever confronted the Carreta Nagua and survived to tell the tale. But among these rare stories, there was talk of negotiations, of sacrifices, of impossible choices that no one should be forced to make. The figure was now halfway between the cart and our door. Elena clung to my leg, trembling. Through the thin wood of our wall, I could feel the temperature dropping more and more, until our breath formed small clouds in the air. "She came for me," whispered Elena, her voice strangely calm. "The lady of the cart came to take me." At that moment, I made the decision that would define the rest of my life. I put Elena behind me, kissed her forehead, and told her to stay with our grandmother. Then, I went out to face what was outside. The cold that hit me when I opened the door was like plunging into icy water. My lungs protested, momentarily refusing to breathe. The world around seemed to have lost all its colors, reduced to shades of gray and black, as if the very presence of the entity sucked the life out of everything around it. The figure stopped a few meters from me. Up close, I could see that what I thought were rags were actually solidified shadows, constantly in motion, like smoke that refuses to dissipate. "I've come for a soul from this house," said the entity. Its voice wasn't a sound in the conventional sense. It was as if the words formed directly in my mind, a whisper that seemed to come from inside my own skull. My legs were shaking, but I managed to stand firm. "Who?" I asked, my voice almost failing. The figure extended a bony finger toward our house. It wasn't pointing to the room where my grandmother was in agony, but to where Elena was. "The child," it answered simply. An icy terror swept through my body. Elena, my little sister, only 8 years old. A whole life ahead of her. I couldn't allow it. "Take me instead," I begged, the words coming out before I could think. The figure tilted its head, the movement too fluid to be natural. "That is not how it works," it replied. "Each soul has its designated time. Hers is now. It was then that I committed my sin." The words I never managed to forgive myself for uttering. "Then take my grandmother," I said, shame burning my face even as the words came out. "She is already suffering. She has already lived her life. She is ready to depart." The figure remained motionless for a time that seemed like eternity. When it finally spoke, its voice seemed to contain a trace of curiosity. "A voluntary sacrifice," it said slowly. "A soul freely offered in exchange for another. This changes things." The entity seemed to ponder, completely motionless in a way that no living being could maintain. Not even its shadow moved, as if time around it had frozen. "I will accept," it said finally. "But know that every bargain with death has a price beyond the soul. You will carry a mark for this." Before I could ask what mark that would be, the figure glided into the house, passing through me like a current of icy air. I tried to follow it, but it was as if my feet were stuck to the ground, my body refusing to obey the commands of my mind. I heard Elena's muffled crying from inside, not a cry of terror, but of sadness, as if she understood what was happening better than I did. Minutes later, or had it been hours, the figure reappeared. Now it wasn't alone. Beside it floated a soft light that moved with its own purpose. Looking more closely, I could distinguish the form of my grandmother within that light. Not her body, but her essence. She seemed younger, free from the pain that had consumed her in recent years, her eyes calmly meeting mine for a brief moment. On her spiritual lips, what seemed to be a thank you formed. There was no recrimination in her gaze, only peace and relief. The figure of death turned to me one last time. "You now carry the mark of the Careta, it declared. "Your ears will always be open to our call. You will hear when we approach others. You will feel our presence before we can be seen. You will know when someone is marked to depart." The entity made a gesture with its skeletal hand, and I felt a sharp pain in my right ear, as if something cold had been inserted deep into my eardrum. The world around me spun, and for an instant, I could hear thousands of distant voices. Laments, pleas, farewells, all simultaneously, as if my ears suddenly captured the last words of everyone who had ever departed. "This is the price of your bargain," concluded the figure, climbing back onto the cart. My grandmother, or what remained of her, floated into the vehicle, joining other similar lights that only now I could see, nestled like luminous birds, inside the shadowy structure. The cart departed, the creaking of its wheels gradually diminishing until silence returned. Colors returned to the world. The air warmed again. I ran inside and found Elena, safe and sound, beside the bed where my grandmother's lifeless body lay. Her face had a serene expression, as if she had simply fallen asleep. That happened 50 years ago. My parents returned the next morning and accepted my grandmother's death as something natural, expected due to her age and condition. Elena grew up healthy, married, had children and grandchildren. Her life was full and happy, exactly as it should be. As for me, I carried my burden as promised. The mark of the Careta manifested exactly as the entity had said. Since that night, I can hear the creaking of the wheels and the tinkling of chains days before the cart actually appears in the village. I know when someone is marked to depart. At first, I tried to warn people, tell them that the Careta would come for them or for someone in their family. Some thanked me. They were able to say goodbye, resolve pending matters, make peace with loved ones. Others cursed me, calling me a messenger of misfortune, as if the warning itself was the cause of their pain. Over time, I learned to be more discreet. Instead of direct warnings, I began to offer company to those I knew were marked. A kind word, a friendly shoulder, sometimes just a silent presence in the final moments. I became a kind of guardian of the threshold, neither fully alive among the living, nor part of the world of the dead. Last week, as I was washing dishes after dinner, I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of the Careta, still distant, but approaching. This time, however, it was different. There wasn't the usual feeling of apprehension, of fear for who would be taken. There was only acceptance, understanding. The Careta comes for me now. My debt is being collected, 50 years after that fateful night. And curiously, I feel no fear, only gratitude for the extra years Elena had, for her life, her children, the continuation of our lineage. Yesterday, I called my eldest niece, Elena's daughter, and told her this story. She listened in silence, her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she simply asked, "What should I do when the cart comes for you, Uncle Miguel?" I smiled and replied, "Nothing. Just remember that every choice has its price, and that even in the most desperate situations, there is the possibility of bargaining, but never without consequences." Tonight, sitting in my rocking chair on the porch, I hear the wheels creaking. In the distance, they are closer now. Soon I will see those skeletal oxen, that figure covered by shadows again. Perhaps I'll even see my grandmother, waiting to welcome me on the other side. The legend of the Careta is not just a story to frighten children. It is an ancestral truth, a reminder that life and death are intertwined in an eternal dance, and that sometimes, just sometimes, we can negotiate the terms of our participation in that dance. The creaking of the wheels is louder now. It's time for me to prepare for my final journey. If this story touched something deep inside you, subscribe for more accounts from those who have lived between two worlds and made impossible choices. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Miguel's place? Would you have sacrificed yourself, accepted your sister's fate, or offered someone who was already at the end of their life? Is there really a right choice when negotiating with death? Story 3. Blood and Redemption. My sacrifice on the death cart. There is a moment when pain transcends the physical and becomes something sacred. When the blood flowing from your lacerated back is no longer a cause for affliction, but a path to something greater. I found that moment when I dragged the death cart through the mountains of New Mexico, my shoulders raw, the ropes digging ever deeper, and the weight of death herself seated behind me, whispering secrets that no living being should hear. My name is Joaquin Martinez. I was born in 1840 in a small village in the highlands of northern New Mexico, territory that at the time oscillated between its Spanish roots, its Mexican heritage, and the growing American influence. Our Hispanic community lived isolated among imposing mountains and deep valleys, far from the big cities, from the trains that were beginning to cut across the country, and especially far from the watchful eyes of the official church. It was in this isolation that the pious brotherhood of our Father Jesus of Nazareth was born, or the Penitentes, as we were known. We weren't rebels against the faith, but its most fervent guardians. In the absence of ordained priests who rarely managed to reach our remote communities, we found our own way to preserve the ancient Spanish religious traditions that many considered too severe for modern times. Our brotherhood accepted only men, chosen for their unwavering devotion and willingness to sacrifice. We were viewed with a mixture of respect and fear by the local inhabitants, and with suspicion and morbid fascination by the Americans who were beginning to settle in the region, mainly due to our practices of corporal penance during Holy Week. At the heart of our most sacred rituals was La Muerte en su Carreta, the death cart. This was not a common symbol. It wasn't an allegorical representation like so many others in the Catholic tradition. The death cart was something more, something that existed on the threshold between this world and the next. Its construction was apparently simple: rough wood, forming a small cart with two rustic wheels, joined by an oak axle. But what made it truly disturbing was what it carried: a statue of La Muerte, carved in black wood from trees that, according to legend, were fed by the blood of martyrs. Death was represented as a female skeleton wearing black garments, seated in a low chair. It was the only female figure allowed in our exclusively male rituals. Its significance transcended mere representation of mortality. It was the very material embodiment of our belief in the constant proximity between life and death, and in the necessity of redemption through suffering. I joined the Brotherhood at 18, following in the footsteps of my father and grandfather before him. The initiation ritual was performed in the Morada, our sacred meeting place, an adobe structure lost among the mountains, far from the curious eyes of strangers. During the first years, my role was to observe and learn. In the Holy Week ceremonies, especially on Good Friday, I watched with a mixture of reverential awe and fascination as the older and more respected brothers performed the most sacred and most disturbing rituals. The most significant of these was the ritual of the death cart. A chosen brother would be tied to the cart with braided sisal ropes, which would wrap around his bare torso. Then, he would drag the cart along the path that simulated the Via Crucis, stopping at 14 stations for specific prayers. The ropes, purposely rough, would gradually cut into the skin, making the penitent bleed in sacrifice. Being chosen for this ritual was considered the highest honor, a sign that the brother was ready for the deepest sacrifice, symbolically approaching the suffering of Christ. For years, I prepared myself spiritually for this moment, closely, observing every detail, every prayer, every movement of the ritual. That day came during Lent in 1862. Our hermano mayor, the leader of the Brotherhood, a man of about 60 named Esteban Duran, summoned me after the night prayers. His deep, penetrating, Zuiz fixed on mine as he said, "It is time, Joaquin. This year, La Muerte has chosen you." I didn't sleep that night. I fasted and prayed until dawn, kneeling in the chapel adjacent to the Morada, preparing my spirit for what was to come. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that something different, something beyond the traditional ritual, awaited me. In the week leading up to Good Friday, I began to hear disturbing stories about the new statue of La Muerte that we would use that year. The old one had been damaged during a storm the previous winter, when the roof of the Morada partially collapsed. The Hermano Mayor had commissioned a new one from Sebastian Morales, an old craftsman from a neighboring village known for his exceptional skills in wood carving. Unsettling rumors began to circulate among the younger brothers. They said that Morales hadn't simply carved the new statue. He had created it following visions he had during a severe fever that afflicted him for weeks. It was said that the old man worked only at night, refusing to look at his creation in daylight. And most disturbing of all, he died as soon as he finished the sculpture, with a strange smile of peace on his face, as if he had fulfilled his final purpose on Earth. I tried to ignore these stories, attributing them to the fertile imagination of the younger ones. But when I was finally allowed to see the cart and the statue that I would carry, something in my core contracted with a primordial terror that defied any rational explanation. 3 days before Good Friday, the Hermano Mayor took me to a small room annexed to the Morada where the death cart was kept. The room was kept locked, accessible only to the leader and the few chosen for penance. The cart itself was like the others I had seen over the years. Rough wood joined with raw leather strips, 2 oak wheels with wooden axles, simple but robust. It was built to last and, more importantly, to inflict due suffering on the one who pulled it. But the statue of La Muerte made my blood freeze in my veins. The Hermano Mayor removed the cloth covering it with the reverence of one revealing a sacred relic. And there it was, not a representation of death, but something that seemed to contain the very essence of life's end. The female skeleton was seated in its chair, covered by a black cloak that seemed to absorb the light around it. Its skull was detailed in a way I had never seen before, with small carvings that suggested impossible expressions for a bone face. The eyes, 2 empty cavities, seemed to observe me with a disturbing intensity, as if they could see not only my body, but my soul in its deepest intimacies. But the most disconcerting thing was the hands. Long, thin, with fingers that seemed capable of moving at any moment. In one hand, it held a candle carved from lighter wood. In the other, a small scythe whose edge, even being wood, seemed mortally sharp. "This one is not like the previous ones," murmured the Hermano Mayor, his voice lower than a whisper. Morales surpassed himself. They say he used wood from an old cypress that grew over a common grave, where the indigenous people who died during the great epidemic of 1780 are buried. As he spoke, I thought I saw, though my rational mind insists to this day that it was just a trick of light, one of the statue's fingers slightly contract, like someone who hears their name mentioned. The Hermano Mayor then explained the ritual to me in detail, although I already knew it well. I would be tied to the cart by sisal ropes that would wrap around my bare torso. I would drag the cart along the path that simulated the Via Crucis, stopping at the 14 stations where specific prayers would be made. The pain would be intense, as the ropes would cut into my skin. making me bleed in a physical sacrifice that echoed the suffering of Christ. What he didn't mention, and that I discovered only the following night, was that year would be special. It was the 100th anniversary of the founding of our Morada, and to mark the occasion, the route would be the longest ever undertaken, climbing to the top of the mountain where, according to legend, the first brothers had received the vision to form the Brotherhood. That night, as I retired to my quarters to continue my fast and prayers, I heard something that left me cold. A low, almost imperceptible sound coming from the room where the cart was kept. They weren't voices or footsteps. It was the sound of wood creaking against wood, as if the statue was moving in its chair. The dawn of Good Friday arrived cold, with a sky of rare clarity filled with stars. The brothers gathered at the Morada even before the first roosters crow, dressed in their black tunics, faces covered by hoods that revealed only the eyes. I was taken to a separate room, where they stripped me from the waist up and anointed my chest and back with blessed olive oil, a ritual to prepare my flesh for the sacrifice to come. The atmosphere was charged with a tension that went beyond the usual solemnity. There was something in the air, a premonition that seemed to affect everyone, though no one dared comment. The chant seemed deeper, the prayers more intense, the glances more furtive. The procession would begin inside the Morada and continue to the exterior, where hundreds of small candles illuminated the path that wound uphill. Family members of the brothers and villagers would observe from afar, forbidden from approaching too close to the sacred rituals. The moment arrived. I was led to the death cart, which now seemed larger and heavier than when I had seen it days before. I knelt before it while two of the older brothers began to place the ropes around my torso. Each turn was deliberately tightened, ensuring that the pain would begin immediately and only increase with movement. When they finished, I could barely breathe normally. It was at that moment that I committed my fatal mistake. I looked back at the statue of La Muerte one last time before beginning the journey, and I swear by the salvation of my soul she smiled at me. It wasn't an illusion, nor a trick of the candlelight. I saw her skeletal lips curve into a smile that no wooden sculpture could form. Her eyes, once empty, now contained a reddish glow, like the dying embers of a fire. I wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. The Hermano Mayor gave the signal and the ritual began. I supported myself on the leather stirrups fixed to the ground and began to pull, immediately feeling the impossible weight for such a small object. It was like dragging a cart full of stones, not a light structure with a wooden statue. With the first step, I heard something that no one else seemed to notice. A whisper directly behind me where only La Muerte was seated. Arrastra, arrastra, tu sangre es mi camino. Pull, your blood is my path. My skin prickled, but I couldn't stop. The ritual had begun and dozens of eyes were watching me. The ropes began to cut into my skin as we advanced to the first station, where we stopped for the first prayer. Sweat ran down my face, mixing with the tears I couldn't contain as I recited the words I had memorized. As we moved out of the Morada and began to climb the mountain trail, something strange happened. The pain, which was initially almost unbearable, began to transform. It didn't diminish. On the contrary, it intensified with each step. But now it was accompanied by a sensation of ecstasy that I had never experienced before. It was as if each drop of blood that flowed from my wounds opened a door to a higher, sharper perception of reality. The voices of the brothers singing became distant, replaced by the constant whisper behind me, now clearer and more insistent. Tu dolor es mi placer. Tu sacrificio es mi fuerza. Your pain is my pleasure. Your sacrifice is my strength. When we reached the 10th station, at the highest point of the mountain, my consciousness was already oscillating between this world and another. The contours of reality seemed diffuse, and I began to see things that couldn't be there. Hooded, figures beyond the circle of brothers, observing in silence. Lights that danced in the dark sky, like stars that had decided to abandon their fixed positions. And most disturbing, I began to feel the statue moving slightly in the cart, as if adjusting itself of its own accord. At the 13th station, my legs finally gave way, and I fell to my knees. The ropes cut even deeper, and I felt the blood flowing more forcefully. The Hermano Mayor approached to help me up as the protocol dictated, but suddenly stopped, his eyes wide fixed on the cart behind me. I followed his gaze and saw the hand of La Muerte, the one that held the candle, had changed position. It now pointed directly at me. The skeletal index finger extended as if selecting me. The Hermano Mayor's face paled under his hood. She has truly chosen you, he murmured, his voice trembling. Tonight, you will see the other side. It was at that moment that it happened. The pain in my back reached an impossible threshold, as if 1,000 white-hot needles were being pressed against my flesh. Then suddenly, it ceased. All the pain, all the fatigue, simply disappeared. In its place came absolute clarity. I could see each star in the sky with crystalline sharpness, hear the breathing of each brother present, feel the pulsing of the earth itself beneath my knees. And I could hear La Muerte no longer in whispers, but in clear, resonant words that seemed to fill all the space around me. Tu alma me pertenece ahora, Joaquín, pero no he venido a llevarla sino a marcarla. Your soul belongs to me now, Joaquín, but I haven't come to take it but to mark it. The world around me seemed to freeze. The brothers, the Hermano Mayor, the candle flames, everything became motionless, as if time had been suspended. Only the death cart and I remained active in that eternal moment. I felt a cold touch on my wounded back, the skeletal fingers of the statue which, impossible as it seemed, had left its chair and was now behind me. Her touch no longer caused pain, only a sensation of intense cold that penetrated to my bones. Those who carry my cart are few, the voice continued. Fewer still are those who survive to tell the story. You are special, Joaquín. You will bear my mark. You will see what others don't see. You will hear what others don't hear. You will be my herald among the living. Something was being inscribed on my back, not with a knife or needle, but with the cold touch itself of those wooden fingers. It wasn't just in the flesh, I realized with growing horror, but in something deeper, more fundamental. It was on my soul that she was engraving her mark. I don't remember how we finished the ritual. The last hours are lost in a fog of visions and sensations that even today, decades later, I can't determine if they were real or imagined. I woke up 3 days later in the local healer's house. Torso was completely bandaged, but even through the bandages you could see the pattern of the ropes permanently marked on my skin, scars that I carry to this day, as a constant reminder of what happened that night. The brothers told me that I fainted at the last station, losing so much blood that they feared for my life. For days, they said, I had intense fevers and delirious in languages that no one recognized. What they didn't explain, and that I discovered only years later, was why the statue of La Muerte was buried after that ritual. Inside a silver coffin sealed with lead and covered with protective inscriptions, never to be used again. They also didn't explain why, since that night on certain occasions, especially when someone in the village is about to die, I can hear the sound of wooden wheels creaking, even when there is no cart nearby. Or why sometimes when I pass near someone, I can see a shadow in the shape of a cart hovering over their head, an infallible sign that their days are numbered. The mark of La Muerte manifested exactly as she promised that night. I became an involuntary intermediary between this world and the other, not a messenger of death, but a witness to its inevitable approach. 60 years have passed since that night. I am now an old man, and the Penitentes are no longer what they once were. The Americans brought their laws and their more domesticated religion. Our most intense rituals were prohibited or softened. The tradition of the death cart became just a story to frighten children. But on the darkest nights, especially during Holy Week, I still feel the scars pulse, as if the ropes were again tight around me. And in my dreams I continue to hear that whisper, "Tu sangre es mi camino." The death cart reminds us that the veil between life and death, between this world and the next, is thinner than we imagine. And that sometimes, when we offer our blood, in sacrifice, something from the other side accepts the offering and marks us forever. Today, at 82 years old, I feel my time is coming. Curiously, I am not afraid. After spending a lifetime seeing the marks of death on others, there is something almost comforting in finally recognizing it in myself. Last night, looking at my reflection in the mirror, I saw for the first time the shadow of the cart over my own head, and I smiled. The circle is finally complete. I leave this account as a testimony and a warning. Not all ancient rituals are merely empty enactments. Some open doors that should remain closed. Some establish connections that transcend life and death. I now hear the familiar creaking of wooden wheels approaching on the road. This time I know they come for me, and I am ready for my final journey on the death cart. If this story awakened your curiosity about ancient rituals and the doors they can open, subscribe for more accounts from those who have lived between two worlds. And tell me in the comments, do you believe that sacrifice rituals like this can really connect us with something beyond our understanding? Or are they just manifestations of the human mind under extreme pressure and deprivation? There are legends that are born of lies, but there are those that are born of truth. The difference is that when they are real, you never sleep easy again.